right, John's here. Now, in classic fashion, Brandon is the last one, but I feel like we should just make him sweat it out. He's got music that's getting ready to play, but I say, like, let's just make him wait. Do the intro like this. Claire, you, and me. Yeah, that's what happens, Brandon. Roll the credits. I mean, the topic tonight, as it's been explained to me, is kind of like your expertise.
That's so, yeah, it can be.
Yeah. I'm so stoked about this. Hey-oh.
No, I mean, I don't think you guys would come with questions, so.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I'm sure we will have a bunch of questions over the course of this. Like, let's be honest. Once we start talking about it, we usually question everything we've ever believed, and that's kind of the goal. So, Brandon, since this is your amazing guest, why don't you tee off?
Tee off? Well, I mean, the topic for everyone who doesn't know, we're talking about sex and sexual health, and it is Sexual Health Awareness Month, which I didn't even know was a thing. Who's inventing these like holidays and like things? I don't know. Like, I didn't know it was Afro Day the other day. It was World Afro Day 2 days ago.
To be fair, I also didn't know that, but like.
Yeah, so when I saw that it was Sexual Health Awareness Month, I was like, perfect. It lines in exactly with what I want to talk to Claire about. I think I'd like to start off with how did you get into that field?
In terms of sexual health and sexual well-being, because
Yes.
Well, first off, it's interesting. I don't think it's a holiday per se. I think that some of these weeks are developed as a way to bring awareness to different topics, right? And I think sexual health, you know, there's the basic sexual health, which is the ideas of like actual health care, right? Like the needs that we have that aren't always talked about because there's so much stigma and shame attached to them. So in my line of work, which is like clinical mental health, which I came into clinical health through like more holistic healing. I taught yoga for over a decade. And my whole thing is that there's like mind-body healing, right? Like our body is a barometer of our truth. And so much of how we experience the world, our bodies know more than our minds think, right? So cognitive stuff doesn't always touch maybe what is being held in our body. So that's the work that I do, but you can't really be in that work without also having an understanding of like how sex weaves into that. Sex is not just the physical act of sex, right? It's all the other feelings and somatic experiences, the sensations that go along with it. In, I guess, at least in this culture especially, there's a lot of gender roles that play into it. There's ideas of power, there's ideas of control, exploitation, ownership. Like sex is more than just sex, right? So when I think about sexual health, I extend it to sexual well-being, which is like all the parts that go along with it. So, was there another?
That is the most solid intro.
Yeah.
It's just, we could not seem more like big dumb men in this conversation so far. Alexa, turn this
and you want my beer?
You can drink
my beer.
I mean, it's just.
Guys, that's why this kind of conversation is important.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So I will say when, I mean, that's such an interest. I feel like there's so many things that I want to talk to you about, but I also I'm so upset that Ange isn't here because she would have a field, like she would just have a blast talking to you about all this. What is, I guess, see, I feel not weird asking the first question because I don't think about it all that much. And I think it's because we feel that we have, I mean, and do have a very healthy sex life and sexual relationship. And we are, I don't know whether it's because, you know, as dancers and just performers separately from our emotional, you know, connection to seeking out truth, the dialectic of truth, as it were, like that also comes so much from that. So I don't feel like I have any questions about that yet, because I know they're going to come up, but I can't really think of how yet to get into it other than what is, if this is not too base of a question, but just a jumping off point, what is the most common issue that, if you're allowed to talk about this, that you see from the male community, since that's who's pretty much.
Goodness.
I know, it's a very broad question.
It's like in the male community in the sense of
Uh,
The health space or the wellness space or
let's
the
say, what's the,
sexual space?
I would say in the, I would say in understanding the connection between sex and wellness.
Oh, interesting. Well, I think that probably is it, that men don't see the connection between sex and wellness, right? Like they just think sex is this thing we do and like I have to do it or this is how I do it. There may not be maybe the questioning or the unlearning of why you like certain things, what that even is, you know?
Mm.
So the exploration of it is,
Yeah, and
is
also the fact of like being able to admit and talk about that, like men want emotion and connection just as much. Both genders, and I mean genders, I can say every gender, right? So however someone would like to identify, does want emotion and connection, right? It doesn't just have to be this performative type of experience. But I think that masculine identity or even like patriarchal ideas is like men have to be dominant and men have to like be, I can't be weak, I can't let her call the shots like sexually, you know, like there's all these old scripts that we've been given, right? And given by multiple things, right? Environments, communities, societies, media. And so when you're unpacking, and I know you guys do a lot of this, is kind of unpacking the idea of masculinity, right? And so even within that, it's like a sexual script, you know, like how do men in heteronormative relationships behave? You know, how does this look? You know, and that's part of your, like, you know, your sexual identity, right?
it's,
So
it's so interesting that you say that, because I wonder if part of, do you find that part of it has anything to do, we always talk about, I mean, we're a generation of men raised by women, a generation of men that had largely, I mean, comparatively to past generations, increasingly fatherless homes and single women raising their boys. Do you think that that plays into it? Because I mean,
plays into it in what sense though? Like what's the implication? That if boys are raised by women, what happens?
I wonder if there's an element of, like, I'm confused by it, because in my situation, I was way more open because I was used to being told what to do. Like, you know what I mean? So I remember a very specific sexual experience in college where the girl was like, okay, so check this out. I get it. I get what you're doing. But she was very vocal and she was like, and that's cool. This is great, but it can be so much better. So let's sit here. And we talked about every bit of it for hours. I mean, and then for weeks and, you know, so on. But it was such an interesting thing. So I'm surprised. I'm surprised by our generation still holding on to those things. I mean,
Yeah. I mean, I am and I'm not, because I think there's also a reflex sometimes when you have, and this is not all the time, but sometimes, like when it's a single mother, right? There's the idea that like, well, your son won't be manly enough. So they overcompensate and actually don't, not to say they have less of an emotional world, right? Because that's the whole thing. It's like men are whole emotional beings and humans, right? Who are allowed to have the range of emotions and feelings, right? And maybe it is not as nurtured sometimes as with women, right? Like women are, we're touched longer, right? Like you hug girls longer. Women are allowed to, like, girls are allowed to hug each other and hang out and be touchy and affectionate and emotional. And a lot of boys don't get that experience, you know, for who knows, for lots of reasons, right? And so then they become adults, and this is like painting with broad strokes, right? It's not every situation, but there's like a theme of then they become adults that are like, I had to kind of like not let my emotions be out, you know, I had to be silent, supposed to be strong and stoic, and like that's the male way to do it, you know. And then I think we're learning now, and like even what you guys talk about is like that is something that you have to work through.
What do you think is the thing that's holding most men back?
Oh
Having
God.
conversations, like if you're talking to different men, what do you think is like? Is there a common theme you're seeing?
I mean, it's like anything, the themes I see with anybody, but like healing the type of things that happen in your childhood, you know, and like knowing that it's not weak to need help. It's not weak to like, that's even the word weak. I hate using it, but I know it is like tossed around like in the narrative, right? Of like how to navigate the world, you know, like the idea that it's okay to talk about these things, to talk about like having attachment issues or talk about the things you didn't get as a child, right? Or I mean, I think for all genders, but like the idea that sometimes like our parents do their best and it's still not good enough, right? It still didn't nurture our emotional worlds. Like we still came out with these wounds that we have to go back and reparent ourselves in a way, you know?
so is it more about, would you say that your work, though it focuses through the lens of sex is essentially just, not just, that sounds incorrect. Reductionist.
Why is Brandon so quiet?
I'm excited to see what it says here in a second, but
Oh no, I'm all about letting everybody get their turn, man. Let everybody go.
You don't think he's just wheeling up like, oh, this one's loading.
Oh yeah, no, he does. He does. He'll just give him a second. He'll start. What you'll see that right there. When the hand comes down, that means he's like, and I'm saying though, and it just, then it's time.
Wait, what was that?
Ignore what I'm saying. I do want to hear what Brandon says.
Oh my gosh. I think one of the things that I love is like when we can break something down. How do you define like sexual well-being? Like, what's that even mean? What's that even look like for someone who's never even heard it before? What is your sexual well-being?
There you go. I mean, I think sexual well-being encompasses a lot of things. But I mean, at its most basic, it's like the sexual health thing, right? Like access to care, what's keeping you from having care? Are you able to be honest with your providers? You know, what are you might need to seek out for these things? Like, these are dialogues you had. How are you being safe? What does safety mean? You know, what acts are you engaging in? What practices are going to help you be the safest in those? You know, and even just exploring that, like just having a conversation with yourself or with healthcare providers, et cetera, and taking care of yourself in that sense, you know. And then the other side of sexual well-being is like sitting with like, well, what does sex mean to me? Like, am I present?
Come on.
What does that mean? I'm posing a question. I'm not.
No, I'm saying let's start there. Let's start there. Let's start there. Like, what does sex mean to me? Like, that's it. What's that? So what does sex mean to you?
Personal question, or how I would pose this to someone else?
Oh, personal, for sure.
I mean, I had to do a lot of work with that, but I also had like not to get super, this is not going to be bothersome to me in any sense, but I'm quite open with it. Like, sexual trauma history. And so because there was trauma and assault like early in my like sexual identity and development, it forced me to look at it and have to look at it from a different lens. And just like, oh, it's and like maybe I like it or don't like it. Like, you have to really start to unpack it and explore it and think about, where do I feel? Do I feel anything? What do I like? What do I not like? Am I able to voice what I'm into? Like, very cool experience you mentioned in college where a woman actually said, hey, we need to have a conversation about this. And I think that's something that should happen in relationships, even if it's not sexual. There should be a dialogue. Like, let me express my desires and what I'm the most comfortable with right now and how I feel. Partner expresses theirs, and then you decide what works for you. It's not I do this because I'm pleasing. I do this because this is the role that I take on. You know, and I think especially like a lot of the sex that we're taught is not, and the sex that we see like from porn, et cetera, is not like female pleasure driven at all.
Sure.
So I think that some of it is, unpacking those, like, where did I learn about sex? What are the biases I might have? What are the judgments I have? What is something that, oh no, I won't do that. But like, what is my instant response? Where did that come from? You know, so being curious, I think that's the thing. Leading with curiosity was something that is maybe everybody doesn't explore it so in depth.
Right. Would you say it's more communication and exchange in that way than it is physical?
I mean, yes, because even the physical stuff has to be to some extent talked about.
Come on, somebody. Yes, ma'am. Why are you making that face? Why is there a face?
Funny.
Who's making a face?
You're making a face. Why are you making a face?
I'm looking at my like people talking. I'm like, hey guys, weigh in.
Well, I have one question. You brought up that it happened as like a childhood thing. Look back at our childhood trauma. Do you see, especially in today's schooling, it being taught, it being revised, how it's being taught? Because I remember I had one class, I think, from what I can remember in high school, and it was like 1 hour, and that was sex ed. It was during like one of our PE classes, and that was like the only formal quote unquote education where it was in me researching and doing my own stuff or talking amongst friends, but there wasn't actual education on this. Is this something that you're seeing become a bigger topic for younger ages?
Oh, I mean, we'd hope so. I think the really young generations, I mean, but that's the thing. I don't work with like kids and teenagers. But in terms of like sex education, so much of what we have to be honest about the fact that we like didn't have a sex education, and the things we were taught were either we just have to unlearn a lot of it, right? Like we might have been taught that like abstinence is the only way, and like so there's a lot of shame around it. If you grew up in any sort of a religious like affiliation, there's a lot of ideas around shame and around bodies and around what it means, around different gender identities, around different sexual orientations, erotic orientations, right? Because you might be into something romantically and be into something different sexually. Very okay, because there's like different entities for both of those. So there's just a more wide open space of things that are possible than I think maybe some of the very binary definitions and roles that we're given. So I would hope they are, but I don't really know if they are doing that. Do you guys think it's the school's job though, or do you think it's parents' responsibility?
Well, I mean, I think it is I think it's the parents' responsibility, but I do think because of schooling is that's where a lot of kids are learning it from school.
No, I mean, I think they're learning from the internet and their friends, but
learning from popular
well,
culture.
they were learning it from their parents or from people that, like adults they could trust.
They learned it from WAP. That's where they learned it. They learned it from WAP.
I mean,
That's
to a degree, though. I think the onus is on the parents, but because, I mean, geez, getting down to sexual identity and talking about that with your parents, with most of the parents, when we haven't even scratched the surface on this channel about the millions of other things that are also the parents on the parent and everybody, not everybody, that is far too broad a stroke, as you said, that too many things are passed off because it's uncomfortable. And until, hopefully our generation, hopefully this generation, some generation that is currently there, it continues to grow, that people become more and more comfortable with themselves and can discuss these things. And speaking of comfort, I kind of wanted to double back to, I'm pointing this way because you're on my screen, you're this way, but I think you're actually this way. So I apologize. I'll flip this in the edit.
We can high-five each other right there.
Yeah. I think there's a lack of comfort between men and the thing that they say they want and strong women. It is, I think a lot of times men will say, and I said this for a long time, it's like, I just want a strong woman. I just want, I'm a good man. I'm a strong woman. We're gonna take over the world together. Except then when a strong woman came along the first time, I was like, whoa, you are harsh like that. You're telling me what to do? Like, whoa. Like that first sexual encounter, I was very lucky that she was very kind about it, but it also threw me in a lot of ways. I was lucky that she walked me through it and that I really wanted to learn those things, so it was fine. But
that's so interesting.
Even meeting my wife, we talked about this on I think the last episode or one of the episodes recently, where like the first time that we had sex, I was like, no, that's not what, like if this is gonna work, we can't have sex on the first date. And she was like, shut the fuck up. Like, and I was like, no, you don't want to do this. You don't, like, it was something that was so foreign to me to have someone who knew themselves so well and could just take over. But that power struggle is more than I think a lot of people bargain for, and more than a lot of men actually want to accept. They want to say, I want a strong woman. Well, what they want is somebody who looks strong on the outside but bows to them. They're strong with everybody else, but as long as you're not too strong to me, because then I have to look, again, I mean, it's the Jungian concept, looking in the place you don't want to look, right? Then we have to do those things that you're talking about, whether sexually or anything else. And I think with what Brandon said about, what is sexual well-being? It's well-being just within the facet of sex. If we take all of these things and we actually open them up and can start looking at them, I think the world would just be so much easier if people just
a lot better. There's a lot to unpack though in what you said. Like there's a lot.
Go for it. Shoot.
Okay, so strong. So basically it was articulated in the sense of like a woman who, like you said, has agency, knows what she likes sexually. Like that should be any gender, right? Any person, like men have that ability. They're allowed to say what they want, say, do this, do that. And the minute a woman does it, it's like, wow.
Yeah.
And that's like even for women to unpack, like how have we taken on that role to some extent of just like pleaser. Like, let's accommodate. And I can speak like for myself, but like women I've talked to and worked with, et cetera, like there's this idea of like, we just do what they want. Like we just want to please them sexually. Like that's the thing. And it's like, you're allowed to like these things and speak up about it, but also to like what you're saying, that sometimes men buck up against that. Like, oh, you want me to do what? Like you're calling, like you're gonna.
Yeah.
Oh, it's like, but that should be any human. Like, and this, I mean, I think we're speaking in very hetero.
Of course. I mean, I'm speaking from my experience, which is all I can do.
Yeah, it's true. But like both people should be able to say, I like this, I don't like this. Can we try this? Let's try that.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and then the idea of power dynamics is like, oh, that one gets hairy, because like power is like, it's a subset of like, it can move into abuse in some settings, right? Like when there's unregulated kind of power dynamics in relationships. But yeah, there's just a lot to think about there. I like that you had that experience though, and we're able to sit with it and to reflect on it with yourself too.
Yeah, I was really, really fortunate that that's kind of been a nice, like, first large scale of that level, where that relationship then blossomed into something really beautiful. And also the articulation of like how we were together / broke up was very like, hey, this is fun, and like let's continue to do this. And it just opened up so many other doors of communication and lines of communication. So yeah, I was really, really fortunate for that.
But no, I do think people would be better off all around if they could look at their own stuff, like sitting with that whole like, what comes up for me? Why does this come up? And it's interesting you say like the whole idea. I know there's like this, people love to say like intimidated by strong women. That's like a popular word, I think. And I don't think men are intimidated. I think there's a fear, because there's a fear of them having to be, what is the term, like subjugated in a way. Like they think they're going to lose a piece of their strength and power that society tells them is their identity, right? So if we unpack this whole thing, right? It's like, even if you look at and you trace when like there was a whole feminist rise and women like were in higher positions in the workforce, et cetera, there was also a rise in violence, not just violence against women, but violence overall, like violence between women. Because when you feel like your power, which is what society has told you is what you have, right? You're a man, that's what you have, power, domination. And it is suddenly threatened in a way, what do? You know? And so not being, giving them maybe a nurtured emotional worlds and well-being that we're hopefully changing now, that's what it goes to. It goes to like, how many times like do men fight when they want to cry, and they're not always allowed to do that. So they act out power in really interesting ways. And it can also be in relationships, right? Like, so if I can't feel powerful in my work, or like if I'm unemployed, because also men identify with like work, job and providing, et cetera. If I can't feel powerful in those ways, I can act that out in my relationship, so like there's a lot of different dynamics that go on. And I think that some of that plays out sexually as well. Sorry, that was a lot.
Oh, no, not even. I wish these things could go on for a lot
forever.
And when the computer starts kicking around that 12 gigabyte mark and I'm trying to upload from a hotel, it gets a little hairy. So no, but I'm looking forward to future conversations. You're fantastic. This is great.
How do you think pornography, the whole industry, and like advertising and marketing have used like the whole idea of sex sells? How do you think that's affecting not only what people want, but also the conversation? Or do you even think it's affecting it?
Like in terms of like the ideas that porn is bad, or that porn
it's like porn is the extremes of what sexual experiences could be, in a sense. And there's people who say like porn especially for men, has made this kind of what they see in porn. They think, okay, if I'm dating someone, then they're going to do everything I see in the porn, which has been like this separate conversation. But do you think pornography and how big it's become a multi-billion-dollar industry, and now advertisers use the whole concept of sex sells? Do you think that kind of push on society is affecting sexual relationship and sexual conversations?
Oh, I mean, I think, there's a lot there. There's a lot there, because like sex sells is a whole other conversation in itself. But like also who runs porn is men, right? Mostly men have developed porn, and like they're the ones that are driving this, right? So again, it's these ideas like where are people going to act out these ideas, right? Even under the guise of sex, right? Like there's a lot of exploitation and victimization under the guise of like, oh, it's just a sex act. And I'm like, is it though? Like there's just more there. And I think in terms of porn, going back to what you were saying about how are people kind of introduced into the world of sex and their like sexual identity or what sex is, et cetera, if they don't have resources that are rooted in anything like human and real and like compassionate and maybe emotional even, they'll turn to things like that. And then how do you know what's real? How do you know what's real? How do they separate the two? If you're young, how do you know that that's not how people sound? How do you not know?
I mean, I think at that point we get back to, if we're discussing it, that's when we get back to the parents. We get back to parenting and responsibility and learning. But that takes a generation. And I don't mean a generation as in a societal generation. I mean specifically like a generation of the family to break that chain and say, no, I will explore these things. I will think about these things. I will do this, if not even for me and my understanding of it. Maybe I'll only get a piece of it. But I always come back to this very Gary V thing of like, it's the same answer. Everything is the same answer wrapped up in different paper, and it's all the same answer, which is it takes exploration of the things that make us uncomfortable, getting comfortable being uncomfortable, which is such a cliche, but cliches are very often true. So it's fucking true though, whether that's sexually or in your relationship separately from sex, which it really isn't, at least in my experience. I think that that's what we're hoping to do with everything else regarding the refinery, is hoping that we can just push more people, and specifically targeted men. And I mean, with a lot of our talks, but not even that. Angelina and I have insane talks after every one of these because of the feelings that she has on it. And hopefully that's what we're doing, is we're just putting conversation into the air.
Yeah.
So that exploration is a part of it and is okay and is accepted, because I don't understand this lack of that.
Yeah. And I don't think that's the other thing. I don't mind talking to, like, I think you can talk to all genders, maybe they've had different experiences in the world depending on how they identify, etc. So there's different issues in that. But like from the male standpoint, there becomes the issues of, like we were saying, male identity, what that means. What does masculinity mean? The idea of like dominating, what does that mean? How do you form like that?
Question for you. Yeah. Well, I've been thinking about it because she said it earlier, and she said porn is not really, it doesn't teach, and this is what we see with like sex period, right? For men, we're talking about performance. How hard can you get it in? How many times can you make, whatever the case may be. It's mainly performance based, and it's really about us, right?
Yeah.
So what does, if there was a guy who had no clue what feminine pleasure looked like, or the focus was feminine pleasure, how would you, I guess, walk him through or introduce him to what that even means?
Oh God, how do you tell somebody what feminine pleasure is if they've had partners and been like, well, I didn't know her pleasure mattered. I didn't really know.
A lot of men don't. It's about them getting in, getting nut, and getting out.
I know, but that's also like, I think I'll send you this cool little chart, but there's like the idea of like performative-based sex and pleasure-based sex, right? And performative-based sex based solely around like penetrative sex, right? It's not just all the other things that could go along in a sexual experience, right? It's
right.
around like, it starts and ends with the idea of like the male being aroused, and then he finishes, and then it's done. And if he doesn't finish, then it wasn't a full, an act. Like there's just all these conditions that go around it when it's really performative based, versus like pleasure based sex could be something so minimal, right? It could be totally focused to the other party. It could be something not penetrative in nature. It could be not, finishing, coming, whatever you want to call it, might not be the goal. And it can still, full whole sexual experience, right? So in terms of how would I like tell a guy to learn about female pleasure, I mean, I think he'd have to first not be afraid to learn about the female body. He'd have to really learn about what the pieces are when women, like, what does pleasure mean for women, right? It's not penetration. I'm gonna tell y'all, it's probably not for the majority of women. And even penetrative sex that is really pleasurable for women is it's because it's connected to like a part of her clit anyway. So
sure. I mean, my mind was blown when I was learning about the vulva versus the vagina, and like I was like, what do you mean? Like for my entire life, I thought this was all just one piece. And his book was like, buddy, it's not one. These are all multiple layers and parts that have their different sensations, different things that come with it. And it's not the same thing. It's not, to say a penis is simple, I would really say a penis is pretty simple. Like, it's.
You're also talking in very, like, pleasure is not just these two erotic zones, right?
Sure, but the education of it is what I'm talking about, right? The education of, like, beyond what you've grown up thinking.
Any zone.
Yeah.
Any zone. You know?
Yeah.
And so there's other body parts that maybe are not the ones that people think about when they think, like, okay, so that's a conversation in itself. Do you think that pleasure can only be this one body part? Maybe pleasure is caressing. Maybe pleasure has to do with your limbs. Maybe it has to do with nipples. Maybe you want to explore, like, butt play on both people, right? Like, it's pleasure. So the other thing would be if you have a partner to openly talk to them about it.
Yeah.
And then communicate in the moment.
Yeah.
What would you say? Some question. What do you think? Not necessarily with a partner, but we were having this discussion. But let's say the three of us guys were meeting somewhere and, like, wanted to have this discussion and talk about this topic. Are there certain questions that you've seen land a lot stronger than other questions, or a good starting point to be like, let's say someone who's never had this conversation, like, where do I even begin? What is, like, a go-to 2-3 questions? I'm very intrigued. I live with 2 women. And it's been interesting having these different conversations because I've always lived with men. And a lot of the conversations I've been able to have with them, we've been able to go deep. And it's understanding the male and female perspective. But let's say if I didn't have that before and it's the first time hanging out with them about this topic, where would you say to begin?
Yeah.
Oh man, I think you'd have to kind of do a reflection on, like, your own sexual experiences, right? Because there's, like, the reflection of experiences I've had with other people and the reflections of experiences I've had with myself, right? So knowing, what do I like? What is pleasure for me? How do I define pleasure? What parts of my body have I explored? Might I want to explore, et cetera, right? Like, again, because to give pleasure, I think to some extent we also have to know pleasure in ourselves, right? So, and if we're asking that of our partners, it's nice to be able to do it for ourselves and reflect as well. And then, like, in my sexual experiences, like you were saying, has it been around, like, oh, how hard can I get? How can I get off? You know, has it been that way? Or can you really go, oh, I remember this person loved this, so this is what I would do for him or her, right? Or can you not? And this is, like, again, there's no shame in this, right? Like, we're all learning. I think a lot of us, again, as we were saying, weren't given maybe the best tools for this and are really having to go, oh, maybe I've stayed in some, like, really sexually disappointing relationships because I just didn't know. And we don't know what we don't know, right? So I would think that would be a place from which to start. Brandon, why are you laughing?
Sexually disappointing. I'm sorry. I'm immature. I'm sorry. Because here's the thing. I've encountered women who they come in and they're like, yeah, I know what I'm doing, and I'm gonna rock your world. And I'm like, you already lost me. I'm already turned off from Jump Street.
About rocking your world. That's again a thing, another script. To be good sexually is to please a dude, where it's like,
yeah.
You can offer me, which is.
But like, for me, honestly, if I'm keeping it 1,000, like, so, and this is just, I'll generalize it, right? There was a contortionist, and we were gonna hook up, and most men in their mind think she's flexible. I can bend her in all kinds of whatever, right? So there's the appeal of the idea of said interaction experience, but I wasn't being truthful with, like what really turns me on. I don't really care how flexible you can be, or you aren't, right? That's why sometimes I laugh at this whole, like, fascination with men and, like, women who do yoga and, like, yoga pants. I'm like, guys, if you don't understand that there's so much more to your interaction and what's going to turn you on than her being able to do a split, you've missed out, buddy. Because how often are women like, I'm just going to go into the split street? It's not happening. Not like that.
Well, I mean, on the one hand, that's not how sex works. Like, if you've ever,
correct,
people be like, yeah, in a bag bend. I'm like, do you know how that it?
This doesn't really.
I think why that happens is because men break women down into objects, right? Like, women get objectified really easily.
Sure.
Actually.
Sure.
vessel for which me to please me, right? So what
Mm-hmm.
what can your body do sexually
Do to please me. Yeah.
Like, this is a human. This is a
Yeah.
who has likes and dislikes and history and experiences and feelings and emotions. It's just a body that can bend and it's hot. And that is super dehumanizing. And I think you mentioned maybe in our text at one point, like, how does such casual sort of ideology around that connect to like rape culture? Because it's a, you know, it's like a pyramid, but things at the bottom of like objectifying women as body parts, as nothing, are sexual, are objects to be acted on sexually to please men. That's the only existence of this person, that this body. That is at the bottom, right? Because when you dehumanize someone, you can treat them like nothing. Because objects aren't
Right.
people. When objects are people, they're way easier to like minimize and assault and abuse and violence against, right? So it. So yeah. What were you saying about the whole?
No, I there's something I've learned about your balls and your heart are connected, or should be at least, right? And I think women have done a really great, or have been fostered in a sense of, you know, those are connected, right? Like their vagina and their heart are connected. Like it's a way of them expressing, and that's not for every woman, right? Some women just want to have sex because they just want to have the experience, but just for the sake of the conversation, this is my way of showing that I care, I love you, I'm going to give you a piece of me, this is the most vulnerable part of me, right? And I think more men have to understand, like, I realized I could not finish climax orgasm if I wasn't in a space of emotional safety and trust with this person, right? And I was really scared, whether I thought so or not, to be vulnerable enough to actually fully experience everything that could happen in the bedroom, or not even in the bedroom, wherever you're at, right? Like the foreplay is really where you get to see vulnerability. Like, this thing you've done has turned me on, and this has never turned me on in my life before. And there's a moment where your body's like, what the fuck am I supposed to do with this? Because now I'm experiencing this feeling, this rush that I've never felt before. I made some wild shit like an elbow. And I was just like, what the fuck? Like, I've never been in this before. But because that person and I had a connection, it opened me up to experiencing pleasure in a new way. But I think at a young age, guys in the locker room, conversations happen, and it's really all about, yo, I got it in, da 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 da. I had her screaming, blah 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 blah, all these different things, and I'm just hopping into the conversation for the sake of acceptance, realizing I left sad, I left unfulfilled, I left like not in any way, shape, or form feeling like this is what I really want to be doing for an hour.
Yeah. But I mean, yeah, that's the whole thing. But that's also the idea of, like, you mentioned the idea of belonging and wanting to like connect with other men, which is a thing. And under shame usually is like, under that pain, right, of shame is the desire to connect, right? So it's a desire to be with other people. So if that is like the environments that you're in, of like, how can I one up each other? And it's very stereotypical idea of masculinity and sexuality. Of course, it's like that to go along with, you know?
It made me laugh when you said that, dude, because I feel like that must have been what, like, because I was pretty unpopular. Like, I wasn't very cool, and I have friends most of the time. So like, I never had that conversation, and like, I never had that experience. I've heard so many guys talk about that where they're like, yeah, man, you know, it's just that. And I've always been super uncomfortable in those conversations. And I'm sure, God knows, I've boasted, you know, and bragged and done my bullshit over the years. But it was such a funny, as you were saying that, I'm pretty sure my eyebrows went like, what?
But I think
What?
that's the important part, though, is to say, like, okay, there were things I engaged in because I'm young, I want to fit in, etc. But I was uncomfortable, and really sitting with, why was I uncomfortable? Maybe because humanized women, and you're like, wow, why would you feel about her? You know, like, maybe there was empathy there, maybe there was a different experience, or maybe it was like, oh, like, I'm uncomfortable because this isn't really how it is. Like, so even exploring what that uncomfortableness is.
Yeah.
Well, I think having a safe space to do that is the goal of these talks, right? Giving, whether it's by when we first started doing these, John, when you started these, or when Brandon brought me into these, we weren't filming them. This wasn't a thing that we did for months.
Right.
Then
Right.
it got to a point where I was like, okay, where we all came to a point where we were like, well, what if what we're doing is exploring this in front of people, being vulnerable, figuring out what that is, and showing these conversations happening, because we can have them, and having them behind closed doors is great and necessary and beautiful, and they don't always have to be in public, but maybe they have to start in public. Maybe these kind of things have to. And something that everybody here has touched on at some point or another is this thing that we keep coming back to, which is, I just want to make sure that anybody who's watching this at any point and whatever timestamp you click on goes through this idea of exploration, this actionable thing. So Claire, what would you say is, if this isn't too broad of a question, what is an actionable thing that someone watching at this particular timestamp could go and do today that could help them at the beginning level of exploring these things, their sexuality and their sexual well-being?
I posted some journal prompts about this the other day, and I will be covering it on my social media for the next week or so. But I think the first thing is just sitting down and thinking like, okay, what is my relation? If it's about sex, because it could just be about relationships in general, right? Because it doesn't even have to be sexual in nature. What is my relationship to intimacy, right? And intimacy is like just the connection of being vulnerable with another human, whatever relationship you identify in. And then moving to how did I learn about sex? What does it mean to me? What did I learn was okay? Are there things I'm interested in that I'm afraid to look at? I have judgments about. What are my assumptions about sex? What are my beliefs around sex? What are my values placed around sex? Where did I learn those? Are there things that I want to keep? Are there pieces that I have outgrown that don't serve me anymore? Is this an idea I want to revisit at some point? I think that just thinking about it, because I think sometimes it's not critically thought about. And like you were saying, even we'll have a wave of an uncomfortable feeling and just be like, no, we can't think about that, and just press it down.
So it's so funny that you say that. Again, everything comes full circle, and I get very excited about these little moments, and I know I'm repetitive about that, but I really want to try this point home, how simple you're just saying journal, write down these things, write down these specific things and these specific prompts that you have, and your info will be linked below, obviously. So everybody check all of this
It's
stuff out.
so simple, but it actually might not be, because there can be
no I mean the
concept comes up with the simple question.
100%. But with regards to what we talked about last week, no matter what it is, I mean, even if it's why do I like dogs and not cats, it literally, no matter what it is in your life, these very simple things aren't necessarily easy. But I do think that the beginning, acknowledging to our audience and to a wider audience, hopefully eventually, that the beginning is actually a pretty simple thing. Pen and paper, put it down and look at it. Let it come out and see where you end up.
I would say there's 3 components to that, right? Okay, so lead with curiosity. Just be curious. Just because we think something or have a thought or have had an experience doesn't make it the forever reality, right? So just be curious. The next part is compassion. Be compassionate with yourself. Again, shame, guilt, all these strange feelings start to come up sometimes, depending on what is coming up in the journaling or the questioning, right? So just be compassionate with yourself. And sometimes people get they have to grieve that they didn't know, right? And that's okay. Be compassionate with yourself. Be compassionate. You might, be at a different age, you might be younger exploring this, but be compassionate with yourself. And then the last one is think about what sensations in your body are coming up as you maybe talk about these things. Can you stay present, or do you feel like you're floating off? Does it feel like a movie? Do your hands go numb when you talk about one subject sexually? The body, again, as I said at the beginning, like you said, full circle, our bodies remember, right? And there's a lot of somatic connections to things. So noticing the feelings and the sensations in our bodies and just being embodied with yourself, right? Being in a comfortable environment when you do these sort of journaling exercises. Checking in with yourself. Do I feel good? Do I feel bad? Do I feel a little icky? How does it feel? Do I need some water? Those sort of things, tuning back into our bodies is a massive component of self-care, right? And healing all different sorts of pieces. And it will also, ripple over into your relationships. be them romantic or sexual otherwise, is to be able to be embodied within yourself.
A journey to self-awareness. I mean, that's the truth. I like that.
It is a courageous journey.
Are there any, I feel like this topic has been coming up. A lot of women are very present in this conversation. I think men are starting to get there, but are there any people, whether on Instagram or different social media platforms, that you think are men that are really leading this conversation for other men to have this in depth of a conversation?
Oh, I mean, I have friends that are sex therapists that are having these type of conversations. I can link some resources for you after this.
Yeah.
There's a lot of different books that are really good that start to explore it. And then I think for men, especially because sexuality is so tied into like male identity to some extent, is even unpacking like the work of like the whole idea of masculinity. What does that mean, right? What is that whole man? What does a man mean? How did I learn what that meant? You know, and for a lot of men, the idea of masculinity is like sex, work, violence, and sports. That's it, you know? So if that's in the like, what is that, a quad? That's 4. If that's in the little quad matrix of what you got, like unpacking that, you know? Because that will ripple over into like how you present sexual, I mean, not present, but how you present in a sexual environment, in a sexual experience. Yeah.
It reminds me, a lot of these topics, I don't know if anyone here has read the book, The Way of Superior Man, by David Dita, but he has this one like small chapter on understanding what men really, what as a man, what do we truly want? And he talked about like even masturbation. He's like, a lot of times men need, whether it be porn or fantasy, to really get to a place where they can actually climax, they can actually hit a point. But it's become so obsessed with that you need something to actually get there. You're not actually listening in tune with your body. And a lot of what he says is similar to what you're saying. It's like having this conversation with oneself to really ask what it is that you want, what it is that has held you back from having the conversation, and what are you still holding shame or guilt against? And so I'm curious, because that book came out a while back, but like, what is the further of that conversation leading to other men? Like, this is, I love this kind of topic, and again, diving in, but where do I go from here? Where do I go?
That's really interesting. And I mean, my first question would be like, what is it about that where they feel the safest, right? Like, what is it about the masturbation in that moment of I have to look at these certain things? Is it a component of, well, this is where I feel safe because there's not another person here, right? Because sex is also relational. So if we have relational wounds and relational trauma, and it's hard for us to connect to people, it's hard for us to be seen or let ourselves be seen, that's going to come up, you know, in the moment of like, I have to, because it's a very vulnerable moment. It can be very, very vulnerable. You know.
Speaking of this vulnerability, I don't know. It's not necessarily a question. I'm sorry.
It's okay.
I don't have a specific question about this yet. I might get to one. But John, you were talking about, you know, having these conversations with, you know, the women in your life, specifically your roommates, and how to do that. But I think it feels kind of like that question we talked about, I think it was last week, about how do I bring up, you know, where her sexual lines are? Like, how do I do this? You know, and how do we talk about our sexual things? And just you talking about masturbation made me think about that level of comfort. I think seeking out people that you are comfortable with and having those conversations is so important for us to do. I didn't have, I didn't have the conversation about my childhood trauma until I met Ange. I was 24 years old, and people had asked, people had pushed, but I didn't feel comfortable with them, whether or not I had dated them for a long time, whether or not I knew them, whether they were friends. I was like, no. But there's something there that, again, in that self-awareness, like I wonder, because I think there's been an interesting thing that I've been around conversations where people will say, well, you're really quiet. You got a prude over here. Like, you know, you being, what's up? What's going on? And it's a lot of times it'll be girls. Like if we're all together, it's like, well, are you kind of weird about it? Like, do you not want to talk about sex? Do you not want to talk about this? And I'm like, no, I want to talk about it with you.
Right.
Like, I don't have anything necessarily.
It's such like a boundary sort of.
It's actually, see, I think that's the way that it's perceived, but it's
boundaries and such a judgment associated with that. Like, you're a man, you want to talk about that?
Oh yeah. Sorry, I thought you were saying I was putting a judgment and a boundary. I was like, no. It's the opposite. I don't.
Yeah, offering silence is not. doesn't mean anything. Their interpretation of that and the push to be like, you know?
Yeah, and I think it's also being in and I don't know what, you know, if Brandon introduced kind of, you know, who we are or what we've done. I'm also a performer. And so I grew up, you know, not grew up, but kind of grew up in, you know, Broadway and in those dressing rooms. And I was in, I was at West Side Story, and everybody always jokes that once you've been in a dressing room with me, you've seen me naked more than you've seen yourself naked, because I just don't really wear a lot of clothes. And one time, my first Broadway show, I was in the dressing room for my first night, getting ready to go on stage, and someone who's actually a pretty well-known person now was in there, and he turned and he goes, "Show me your dick." And it was just this very like challenging thing of, who are you? What is your thing? And I was just like, yeah, hey. And it wasn't sexual, it wasn't aggressive, it was, and we all knew his personality, and this was something that this character that he played, and it was very like, how vulnerable are you willing to be in here? Who are you? And it's an interesting thing that situation I'm totally fine with, but if they wanted to talk about, depending on who was in the room, if they wanted to talk about certain other aspects of sexuality, I probably would have been like, nah, I'm good. And just figuring out what those lines are and why those are there.
Well, it's also an extension to some extent of where we can feel safe, right? And sometimes people think safety is comfort, but they're not the exact same things, right? Like, so safety is more so an extension of when you can make your own choices. And you can say, I want this, I don't want that. I want to be here, I don't want to be here. Today, I'd like to talk about this thing. This person, I don't, you know, and being able to do that. So it was like, and maybe the extension of same thing with, we have different types of relationships with our bodies, you know?
Yeah. I hope I'm going to put so many timestamps in this motherfucker. I just want, because I find, like, let's be honest, this is YouTube, and this is a very long form thing. And a lot of people at some point will have gotten uncomfortable enough to be like, I don't know. Or just be like, no, I've got that squared, like any of us do, but I've got that part squared. I'm gonna skip. And so what I found is the more timestamps that I put in, so people can look and go, well, okay, yeah, maybe I want to know about that. Maybe I want to know about that. That people get further into the videos, and I feel like the comments have picked up. We're reaching more people. It's really exciting. But yeah, I'm so sorry. I am soon going to have to go, but maybe 5 more minutes. Is that possible for everybody?
Yeah. I think my question in regards to comfort and safety, if you were to a woman's watching and she wants to create that space for her man, and they've been having a rough time with him opening up sexually, what would you say to her about having that conversation with him and creating a space for him to have an opportunity to open up?
Well, it's interesting because it is supposing that, like, it's not a safe relationship and he doesn't feel comfortable opening up. So in my idea, because I don't think it's just like women opening that conversation. I'm going to say either gender wants to open this, whoever their partner might be. If you'd like to open this up into a conversation, in an environment that you're both comfortable in, and say, are you open to talking about this thing? You know, and I'm like, no, I want to talk about it, respecting that boundary, you know? Because I think sometimes in relationships, we think we know better. We're like, oh, you'll like it. Just let me do this thing to you. Instead of like, just letting them have the experience they're having, you know, or saying, okay, not today. Is there another time you'd like to talk about this? You know, or would you like to share with me what's keeping you from feeling like you can open up with me? You know, I mean, like, it's all a place from which to have a conversation. So if it's like, we'll say one party in the relationship needing more of a sexual exploration charge of just, you could even confront it in the sense of like, hey, I've been thinking about this for myself. Can I share with you some of the things I've been thinking about that I'm interested in, that I'd like to think about? You know, creating an environment where it's like, I'm willing to share. And that, I think, creates a space of letting the other person share too. And again, examining those like assumptions, biases, judgments. Because like, your partner doesn't want to share one idea, and the person, it's like that whole don't like yuck my yum kind of thing. Like, is that the saying? I don't know. But it's like, don't disregard or talk down on something I'm into, right? Because you don't like it. be open to say, you get to like what you like and I like what I like, and hopefully we can find a space that works for both of us. You know, so that's the other sometimes judgment, like the minute someone, you know, gets their like, I'm gonna say I like this thing, the person immediately goes, oh. And like that immediately shuts down. Body goes into protection, isn't safe. I'm not okay being myself. We learn, right? I care about my, I can't be me anymore. And that creates a really interesting, not, I'd say not healthy, but whatever, dynamic. So it's being able to sit with that with your partner. So, I mean, I think we do this unconsciously, right? And some of this is so programmed into us. Like, you know, there's a lot of homophobia around certain acts, and men will immediately go, oh no. And you're like, where did that come from? What was that reaction? Why was that so instantaneous? You know, and again, even not shaming someone for that, just being like, yo, you reacted really quickly. And can we talk about that? Where that came from? You know?
Yeah. I mean, a lot of guys, they don't want to be seen as, or don't want to be perceived as weak, but the what's synonymous with weak is gay for a lot of men, right? So this is something that this makes me gay, or this is something a gay man would do. And in the bedroom, I'm not about to be something that I'm not. So let me be the man. We actually had talked about this on one of our men's group calls, which was like, there's a lot of sensation, scientifically speaking, for men in the well, scientifically, the anus, right? Like there's sensation and whatever. There's actually this article that's pretty funny. This guy had to get a prostate exam, and this doctor hit his G-spot and made the guy come, and the guy shot the doctor because he. And I was just like, what kind of a hyper masculinity? And the doctor said, he says, listen, speaking about this particular thing, it's a common thing because men don't understand that they have a G-spot there. And that a lot of men, when they have the exam, end up having an orgasm, not because they were aroused, but because he's going in there and he's hitting it repeatedly. So it's interesting to open men up to this idea of like, no, like you're not gay. And if you are gay, then you're figuring out and finding out that you're gay, and that's okay. But like realizing that it's not a bad thing for you to like clam up about and prove something to somebody about.
Yeah, but again, that's just like raging homophobia and connected
Yes.
to raging like
Yeah.
because the real issue is anything that's deemed feminine. So anything that's associated with a woman, like, oh, don't touch my nipples. And I'm like, what? Men have a lot to unpack, guys. And I know I use that term a lot, but like there's a lot of things that people do without even really thinking. You know, like it's funny to joke about like dudes being aroused through their butthole. Like really it's not. It's just another pleasure point. So what? Maybe you're not. Doesn't mean, it doesn't make you any sexual orientation. You're allowed to decide that for yourself. You're allowed to decide what you like sexually. You're allowed to decide what are your erogenous zones. Is that the word? It's a tongue. You're allowed to decide that. And an act doesn't necessarily make that. And you might be into lots of different acts and have sex with the same gender and still not identify as gay because those are a sexual act, right? You're allowed to define these things. I know, mind blown.
Well, to chime in, so the fact of being sexual or sexual health awareness month, outside of just conversation, I mean, this is the first time I'm hearing that's a thing. And I think that's awesome. And if we were to continue that conversation, obviously conversation being one of the points, what is another aspect of sexual health awareness that they're trying to bring up outside of just the conversation? Or is that the main point of the awareness of this is like people converse?
I mean, the first point of it is like education. It's brought to you by people that know what they're talking about. You know, like education from people that are in the space. Like there's sex therapists and counselors through ASECT. I'll link it as well for you guys. So you can find someone who's like trained in the space. It's not just somebody who, you know, is on social media. Like it's people that are trained in this space that can really talk to you about these things. Some people have a focus around health as an extension of STD awareness, STI awareness, ways that we can keep ourselves the most safe in that sense, right? Because when there's shame attached to something, it's hard to even seek out the resources to keep us safe, right? Because maybe you're engaging in an act, but you don't want to tell anybody about it, so you not actually are being safe, right? So the idea that education and taking the shame and the stigma off of sex and sexuality, et cetera, can help people be more safe and thus care about their health more. And then there's also an avenue that wants to discuss pleasure. And that pleasure is on the continuum, right? Like sex doesn't have to just be like, yes, safety should always be a component. Consent should always be a component. And that's consent for everything, even in non-sexual relationships, asking and getting permission for things. And then pleasure's okay. Pleasure's not bad. And so there's this idea that understanding, and like we were saying, understanding your own pleasure, knowing that you can give yourself pleasure. What do you like? What do you not like? Again, like the whole idea, maybe I shied away from something because I'm homophobic, maybe I shied away from something because deep down I don't want to be seen as a woman, and it's like so uncomfortable to say, but those are things to unpack and sit with. But pleasure can be in that space. And for women, especially, like women's pleasure can be prioritized. And not just seen as like, oh, she's this really loud, boisterous woman who comes in saying what she wants. This is just sex. We're allowed to say what we want and we don't want. And there's not an imbalance of who gets to choose, right? We both get to choose.
Preach.
I mean, I think that's a fantastic way to end.
That was amazing.
Yeah. Claire, thank you so much for being here. This was a fantastic conversation.
You and your partner. This would be so nice for us all to have a conversation.
Yeah, I'm very much looking forward to that. She's gonna really enjoy that. This is a topic that we talk about a lot, but within our own thing, not so much on the channel, just because we don't, like you said, we don't have anything other than our own frame of reference and perspectives to go off of. But it'll be exciting to maybe in the future have you on for one of the episodes and continue this conversation. This is great. So Brandon, thank you so much for connecting us. Jon, thanks for creating this. Oh, good. My computer's gonna go to sleep. Everybody, this has been episode 12 of The Refinery. Thanks so much. Hold up your glass or bottle or, whatever. Cheers.
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 You guys are awesome.
You again. Appreciate it.